This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. On the day I gave birth, my husband proposed to his girlfriend. The next day, Rockey hurried back to take care of me. He was so attentive that I almost thought the video I saw was just my imagination. When my postpartum confinement ended, I went out to sweat and heard sounds in the stairwell. Two people emerged, entangled in each other. It was my husband and his young girlfriend. I looked at them and softly said, "What a coincidence." I felt a strong contraction, and there was a wetness below. My water had broken, and the baby was coming. It was a few days earlier than the expected due date. I had planned to wait for Rockey to return from his business trip before going to the hospital, but plans change. It was Christmas Day, and the helper had gone home to be with her family. Thinking of this, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. The ambulance took me away, and I called Rockey, but there was no answer. Next, I called my mom. She said, "Haley, I have to take care of the kids, so I won't be coming. After you give birth, your brother will bring us all to visit you." Before she finished speaking, there was a burst of noise from her end, and she hung up. On a day that's supposed to be for family reunions, I was alone. I had anticipated this before calling, but there was still a part of me that hoped, what if she felt sorry for me? When that hope was crushed, the sadness in my heart mingled with the physical pain, overwhelming me. The dilation progressed quickly. After receiving the epidural, the pain gradually subsided. I wiped away my tears and waited to give birth. The baby came out smoothly, small, wrinkled, and tiny. I felt utterly exhausted, my body drained. I was wheeled into the hospital room and soon fell asleep. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, it was still just me and my newborn daughter. She didn't cry or fuss, not even opening her eyes. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, but before I could call Rockey, I received a message. It was a video. The man in the video was my husband. He was in a private room at a bar, holding a ring, kneeling on one knee, proposing to a girl who looked no older than 20, saying, "Baby, will you marry me?" Then there was a burst of cheers. When I closed the video, wanting to ask when it had been taken, I saw that the person had already retracted the message, and the one I sent back turned into a red exclamation mark. It was a stranger with no contact info, sending me a strange video, but I could see clearly it was Rockey. I called Rockey, but the sound came from outside the door. He pushed the door open gently, walked to me, glanced at the woman lying next to me, then looked at me. He tucked my hair behind my ear and kissed my forehead, saying, "I'm so sorry, honey. I was really busy with work yesterday and couldn't make it back. You've been through so much." I stared straight at him, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Emotions swelled inside me, but I quickly suppressed them. Tears overflowed from my eyes as I threw myself into his arms. He gently stroked my back, comforting me, just as tenderly as always, as if nothing had changed. That video seemed like a bad joke, but deep down, something had changed. You shouldn't cry too much after giving birth. It can harm your eyes. Rockey and I discussed whether I should go to a recovery center, but I didn't want to stay in an unfamiliar place. Following my suggestion, he hired 2 postpartum nannies for me. He also stayed by my side almost constantly, even taking over the nighttime feedings. I didn't mention the video, and he didn't bring it up either. One night, he got a phone call. He quietly got out of bed and tiptoed to the bathroom. I sat up and followed him. From inside, I heard him say, "Don't worry, baby, I'll be with you soon." His voice was soft, but I heard every word clearly. I then quietly went back to bed. I lay there with my eyes closed, tears slipping from the corners, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed tightly by a giant hand. But I couldn't make a scene. During postpartum confinement, it's bad for your health to cause a ruckus. Everything would have to wait until after I recovered. Soon, the other side of the bed sank down, and he wrapped me in his arms, his large hand covering my small one. But everything had already changed. He was with someone else now. He had even proposed to her on the day I gave birth. In that moment, I felt as if I'd fallen into a deep abyss, my body uncontrollably shivering with cold. When would he ask me for a divorce? I was almost curious. The next day, he got up and went to his study to work. I stayed in bed, pulling the covers over my head, staring at the curtains. The curtains blocked the light so completely that I couldn't see anything clearly. The nanny brought the baby over, and I took her to feed her. Then, as I groggily went out for breakfast, I saw Rockey holding bags from an upscale restaurant. It was my favorite place for wontons. The restaurant doesn't do takeout, and they usually sell out early in the morning. He pulled out the food, setting it on the table and smiling. I stood in line for half an hour to get this, and it's still hot. Then he handed me a spoon. "Come on, eat while it's hot." The nanny said, "Madam, the gentleman really loves you." The helper added, "Sir and madam have always had such a good relationship." I used to think so too. When did things change? I stared at him, lost in thought. He hadn't changed at all in appearance. Maybe noticing my daze, Rockey smiled and poked me. "Come on, eat, or it'll get cold." "Oh, okay." I snapped back to reality and started eating. After 2 bites, I couldn't eat anymore. It felt like something was stuck in my stomach, too hard to swallow, but impossible to spit out. So, I set the spoon down and got up to check on the baby. The baby was soft in my arms, not crying or fussing. My appetite worsened, and I often threw up after eating. I could feel my emotions spiraling. Each time I was on the verge of losing control, I pulled myself back. My breast milk supply dwindled, so the baby had to be fed formula. Rockey came over with a bowl of soup, saying, "Drink some soup, okay? You're going to." Before he could finish, my emotions erupted and I couldn't stop them. I said I don't want to drink it. "Can't you understand? Just leave me alone." He tried to say something, but I waved my hand, knocking the bowl from his grasp. Some of the soup spilled onto my hand. Instantly, my hand turned red. He hurriedly pulled me to rinse it under cold water, but I felt no pain. I had become numb, almost like a mad woman. If this continued, I wouldn't recognize myself anymore. I try hard to adjust my emotions. Rockey no longer forces me to drink soup. If there's no breast milk, we'll just use formula. The baby will grow up either way. The days pass by smoothly. Everyone at home is cautious, afraid that they might accidentally upset me. And I'm also adjusting myself. I tell myself again and again, it's okay, I have money, I have a child, I can take care of myself after the divorce. My mood slowly improves. On the day I finished my postpartum recovery, Rockey told me he had something to do and couldn't accompany me for the sweating treatment. I casually replied, "All right, go ahead." The nanny carried the baby out, and I followed behind. We went to the underground garage together, but I had left my phone upstairs. When I went back to get it, I heard voices in the stairwell. At that moment, suspicion arose, and I couldn't suppress it. I walked slowly forward and stood at the doorway. Inside, I heard a woman's voice. Her voice was sweet and sticky. She said, "Why haven't you come to see me? Do you know I haven't seen you for a month, and I miss you so much." "I miss you too, but she's in postpartum recovery. I can't bring up the divorce now. Can you wait a bit longer?" Soon, I heard the sound of kissing and moaning. I leaned against the wall, my hand dropping from the doorknob. Soon, the door was pulled open from the inside. They came out entwined, as if heading to our home. The woman saw me first, her expression froze, and she pushed the man in her arms. Rockey stopped in his tracks and looked back at me. I looked at them and said softly, "What a coincidence." Rockey came forward to grab me, but I dodged him. I asked them, "Are you heading to the house?" I walked ahead and opened the door, gesturing for them to come in so they wouldn't make a scene outside. The woman followed behind Rockey and slowly entered the house. The moment they stepped inside, I closed the door. I looked at them again and said, "Do whatever you want to do." They didn't move, and the air grew silent. Rockey frowned and stood in front of me, his hands on my shoulders. I looked into his eyes. He said, "Haley, let me explain." At that moment, I was furious. I pushed his hands away. "What do you want to explain? Explain how you proposed to her while I was giving birth, or how you flirted with her in the bathroom during my postpartum recovery." I looked away and walked to the woman. I reached out and grabbed her clothes, acting as if I was going to take them off. She screamed and pushed me, telling me to get away. Rockey stepped between us, grabbed my hand, and pushed me away, shouting, "Haley, haven't you had enough?" Then he lowered his head and gently asked her, "Did she hurt you?" She nestled into Rockey's arms, tears brimming in her eyes. I watched this scene unfold, feeling as though all the strength had drained from my body. I leaned against the sofa to keep from collapsing. After a long time, I asked him, "When did the two of you get together?" Rockey comforted the woman in his arms before looking at me. "If you hadn't gotten pregnant, I would have asked for a divorce a long time ago. Since last year, your emotions have been unstable. Everyone has to tiptoe around you, and you throw tantrums at the slightest thing. Do I owe you something?" My legs gave way, and I sat on the sofa, gasping for air. It took me a while to calm down. "So, it was before I got pregnant." I lowered my eyes and didn't ask why, because I knew it didn't matter anymore. My emotions have never really been stable. Maybe they never were. When you're in love, everything is fine. Even the outbursts and cold treatment are seen as personality. But once the love is gone, you become a mad woman, and no one owes you anything. And the woman behind him is gentle and considerate. Even her tears fall beautifully, invoking a protective instinct. I waited until I had calmed down before saying, "Since that's the case, let's get divorced." "All right." Rockey turned and went to the study, coming back with a divorce agreement, placing it in front of me. He had everything prepared long ago, yet he still pretended to be the perfect husband in front of me. It was laughable. He handed me the agreement and a pen. When I flipped through it, I saw his signature. The ink had dried. Who knows when he signed it? Probably a long time ago. Our family wasn't rich. We ran a small business. I owned 2 properties and a car. In the agreement, he left the properties and car to me, along with 10% of the shares for the child. I signed my name in the space and pushed it back to him, saying, "Pack your things and get out." Without hesitation, Rockey left with his little girlfriend. He left everything behind, including his child. I curled up in the corner of the sofa, and as soon as he closed the door, tears spilled from my eyes. It felt like my heart was being gripped by an invisible hand. Even though I had prepared myself, it was still unbearably painful. The nanny came upstairs with the baby after not seeing me for a while. As soon as she opened the door, she said, "Madam, I ran into Sir in the elevator." Seeing my tear-streaked face, she sighed several times. She asked me, "What happened? In this house from now on, there will only be Madam, no more Sir." I stood up, but everything went black before I slowly regained my vision. Then I walked step by step toward the bedroom. All plans were disrupted, and the sweating treatment was long forgotten. In the following days, I waited at home for Rockey to inform me when to go to the civil affairs office. It wasn't until half a month later that he finally contacted me to arrange a time to file for divorce. I sat in the back seat, saying nothing. After signing the divorce cooling-off period agreement, we stood outside the civil affairs office. I asked him, "When you're with her, does it feel good?" "Yes, everything is great between us." I figured it must be good. Youth and beauty were her assets. After divorcing me, he could marry her and give her a home. That was probably his most sincere thought. I asked him to drive me home, and we stayed silent the whole way. In the underground garage, he asked, "Can I go up and see Alice?" I laughed softly at his question and replied, "When you were in bed with her, did you think about your child? From now on, you'll never see her again." I got out of the car and walked away. From then on, my child will have no father. On a quiet afternoon, I received a package. Tearing it open, I found Rockey's medical report. It was sent by the person I arranged to take him for a checkup. At the top of the results was a line, "Suspected colon cancer. ****. No wonder he's often had diarrhea, staying in the bathroom for long periods, and sometimes even bleeding." I put the report in the wardrobe, looked at my daughter still peacefully asleep, and a thought crossed my mind. I asked the nanny to watch the baby and went to the Civil Affairs Bureau to withdraw the divorce application. A month later, Rockey called me to set a time to finalize the divorce at the bureau. I glanced at my freshly done nails, smiling, and said, "I've thought about it. Let's not get divorced for now." On the other end, I heard crying and shouting. I glanced at the phone screen, hung up, and blocked him. If Rockey dies in 6 months, whatever remains of his assets will belong to me and our child. If not, then divorcing later won't cost me anything. The nails may have been messed up, but it didn't dampen my mood at all. Rockey and I met in college, fell in love. He was my senior from the same department. To pursue me, he brought me breakfast every day, accompanied me to class, and even after graduating and being busy with work, he would still visit me at school just to see me. At that time, I loved him too. Seeing the exhaustion on his face, my heart ached. I told him, "We can see each other on weekends. We don't have to meet every 2 days." He hugged me and smiled, kissing me. "I wish I could see you every hour." At first, we couldn't afford a place in the northern part of the city, so we rented. He hugged me and said, "Haley, when things get better, I'll buy you a house and a car." I hugged him back, replying, "Sure." He kept his promise. Later, we bought 2 houses, both in my name. Even the one he bought for my parents was under my name. He bought me a car to make it easier for me to get around. But people change. When life got better, it became flat and uneventful. Nothing but endless calm. Perhaps this calm bored him, making him crave excitement, making him resent my emotional instability. He even started thinking the flowers outside smelled sweeter. Remembering the past, it hurt like a sharp pain through my chest. The new year was approaching. Normally, Rockey would take me back to his hometown for the holiday, but this year, that wasn't going to happen. After the nanny left, it was just me and my daughter at home, so I decided to go back to my mom's for the holiday. When I opened the door, my mom was playing games with my nephew. Seeing me, she smiled and welcomed me in. I placed the baby on the sofa, playing with her while chatting with my mom. When my dad came in, the first thing he asked was, "Where's Rockey? We're in the middle of a divorce." I replied casually. That one sentence triggered my dad's displeasure. He looked at me with a cold face, anger evident. I looked back at him and asked, What's the matter? Haley, are you stupid? Now that your life is good, you've forgotten who got you here. If it weren't for Rockey, would we have what we have today? You should go and beg him not to divorce you, even if you have to kneel. He credited all of our success to Rockey, but the company was built by both of us, not just Rockey. Even my mom urged me not to divorce, saying that divorce isn't a good look, and people would laugh at us. They didn't ask what happened, only worried about what others would think. Seeing me unmoved on the sofa, my dad came over to pull me, demanding I go find Rockey today and beg him to reconcile, or he'd cut ties with me. I wanted to laugh, but couldn't. I softly said, "How can you say that to your daughter?" I thought if I didn't get angry, this would blow over. But my dad's face grew darker. "If you divorce, then get out of this house. Don't ever come back." He yelled at me. When I was little, they were like this too. Endless scolding and hitting for me. Endless spoiling for my brother. When I grew up and made money, they said it was all out of necessity. I believed every word. When my brother needed a car and house, they came to me for the money, and I gave it to them. But I was cautious, handling the paperwork myself, so the house was in my name. The house was mine. They only had the right to live there. All these years, I lied to myself, thinking my parents did love me, even if just a little. So, when I couldn't reach Rockey during childbirth, I called my mom, hoping she would come, even if just for a moment, but she said she didn't have time. She promised to visit after the baby was born, so I waited for her, even after my confinement period ended, and half a month passed. She still didn't come. That's when I realized she was never going to visit. But when my brother's baby was born, my dad asked me to buy a gold bracelet for my nephew. In their hearts, I would never measure up to their son, even though everything they used, big and small, was bought by me, even though I was the one who took care of my mom when she was sick. Even so, they believed it was my duty as a sister and daughter. They thought of their son, and when their grandson was born, they thought of him too. They never once thought of their daughter, but why should they? When it comes to dividing assets, they forget me. When they need money or someone to take care of things, they remember me. They never loved me. This thought grew stronger in my heart, but it was too late for me to realize. I stood up, looked at them, and quietly said, "When we registered this house, I handled the paperwork, and it's in my name, so if anyone's leaving, it's you. If you want to stay, you can, but you'll have to pay me rent at market price each month. Otherwise, I'll ask someone to move you out." I picked up my baby from the sofa and walked straight to the door. My dad slapped me on the back, his curses ringing in my ears. The pain from the slap spread across my body. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't look back. I stepped out of that house. This new year, everyone is reuniting, but I no longer have a home. I have been waiting a long time without receiving rent. I hired someone to send my parents and my younger brother with his wife's belongings back to their hometown, and conveniently changed the locks. They came to me, causing a scene, saying I was cruel and would meet a bad end. After a commotion, they shifted to begging. Some people are always so ungrateful. Sometimes they don't even realize it's bad. And when something is taken away from them, they start praying to have it back. But those things were never theirs to begin with. I called the police to drive them away. An aunt sat in front of me, serving me a bowl of soup. I looked up at her and asked, "Was it really my fault?" "Not at all," she replied, pulling out a chair to sit down. She spoke softly. "Sometimes it's like this. You do your best, but they think you're not good enough. And when you go to extremes, they think you're too extreme. You can never reach their hearts. You don't need to satisfy them. You're over 30 now. Just make yourself happy." Sometimes, my parents are even worse than strangers. In the past, they would kidnap me, saying having a younger brother would provide me with a relative who could help me when bullied. But the reality is that they bully me too, insulting me. I took small sips of the soup when the child sleeping in the room suddenly started crying. The aunt went into the room to comfort the baby, and someone inside shouted to me, "Ma'am, Alice has a high fever." I touched her forehead. It was indeed hot. The aunt put the child down and started packing. I quickly changed clothes and went downstairs together. We rushed to the hospital. It was acute pneumonia and required hospitalization. When I went to handle the admission procedures for the child, I ran into Rockey and his girlfriend at the payment counter. She was slender, with a slightly protruding belly. It was obvious at a glance that she was pregnant. No wonder she was so eager to have Rockey divorce me. No wonder Rockey would propose to her. I found all the reasons. I held the payment slip, wearing a faint smile, and walked over slowly. They turned around and saw me, stunned for a moment. Before they could speak, I said, "What a coincidence, coming for a checkup." Rockey opened his mouth to speak, But before he could, the person beside him interjected. Yes, I'm having twins. Unlike you, who only had a little girl. Rockey said he prefers sons. Is that so? I asked in return, then congratulations to you both. The moment I turned, my expression changed. This child must not be born. I had someone investigate Rockey's girlfriend and her activities. I learned her name was Serena. She used to work at an advertising company but had left. Probably to focus on her pregnancy. She rarely went out, only occasionally bringing lunch to Rockey at the office. I could hardly find a way to get close to her. Then, an invitation to a dinner party was sent to my home. I thought Rockey would definitely bring her along. The reason she often went to the company was to assert her claim. Such a great occasion, she would surely attend. I handed the child to the aunt and changed into a dress before heading out. As soon as I entered, many people called me Mrs. Rockey. In the past, they used to call me Boss Haley. Since I chose to return to family life, my only identity has been Rockey's wife, managing everything behind him, but he never noticed my efforts. I saw Serena from afar, walking beside Rockey, linking arms with him, her feet in high heels, wearing a long evening gown. This outfit was very nice and made my plans easier. If she hadn't worn high heels, I might have had to think of other ways. But now, the situation was very favorable for me. I waited in a corner for an opportunity, seeing Serena walking towards me slowly. She walked extremely slowly, as if afraid of falling. I stepped forward and accidentally bumped into her. The wine glass in my hand shook, spilling wine on the floor. She pushed me away and continued forward, almost stepping onto the spilled wine. I counted in my mind, and suddenly her body tilted forward uncontrollably. She slipped and fell, everything unfolding as I had envisioned. Blood poured from beneath her, staining her yellow dress red. Perhaps it hurt a lot. She began to sweat profusely, pointing at me. Her voice was weak. It's you, Haley, it's you. What did I do? I stepped back, creating distance. I'm not responsible for what happened. There are so many people here. If I did something, wouldn't others see? I merely bumped into you. You slipping has nothing to do with me. Did I push you? Chaos ensued around us, but no one dared to step forward. Rockey pushed through the crowd, picked up the person on the ground, and walked quickly outside. And I, watching their backs, felt a faint smile rising within me. An illegitimate child shouldn't have been born. If born, it would be scorned by everyone. I solved a huge problem for them. Not only did they not thank me, but they also blamed me. I raised my wine glass and downed the remaining wine. Soon, I received news that Serena had lost the child. She cried and made a fuss in the hospital room, demanding Rockey give her an explanation. She forced him to divorce me and marry her. But Rockey was never a good person. He gave Serena some money and stopped visiting her. The reason he liked Serena was simple. 1. She was young and beautiful. 2. He wanted her to have children for him. Because I had said that I would only want one child in this life. The reason he abandoned her was just one. Because she had injured her body and could no longer give birth. She could never bear the son he wanted. Serena came to my door, cursing me endlessly. I didn't want to open the door to see her, but she was outside, cursing my daughter. I opened the door, and upon seeing her face, I slapped her across the face. Try cursing me again. She lunged at me, a person just discharged from the hospital, barely having any strength. I grabbed her hair and pulled her into the house, making her take a good look in the mirror. In front of the mirror, she suddenly froze. The person in the mirror had bloodshot eyes, dark circles under her eyes that couldn't be concealed, and her lips were pale, looking utterly dreadful. She asked me, "You did this on purpose, didn't you? Do you have any evidence?" I retorted, "I just accidentally bumped into you that day. The wine spilled by accident. How is that intentional?" She looked at me, tears on her face, and let out a low laugh. I wanted to pity her, but if I pity her, who would pity me? She stepped backward, and I followed her, seeing her off. As she entered the elevator, I called out to her, "At your age, is it worth it to be so desperate for a man who doesn't even care about you? It's worth it. I love him." Hearing her words, I couldn't help but laugh. The irony spread. Then you're quite immoral. Falling in love with a married man, destroying his family, and ending up like this is your own doing. She didn't say anything more. Entering the elevator and slowly descending, I moved with the child. This place was too unsafe. Rockey had access cards to enter the community, and my parents did too. These messy matters were really bothering me. Rockey hadn't contacted me, and I thought the report was a misdiagnosis. I heard he fainted at a dinner party, and was rushed to the hospital. His assistant contacted his mother, and his mother contacted me. I hurried to the hospital, and as soon as I entered, I saw him curled up on the bed. Seeing me arrive, his assistant stepped forward, telling me, "Ma'am, the doctor said it might be cancer. Is that so?" I smiled at him. patting his shoulder. Thank you for your hard work today. I hired a nurse to take care of Rocky, while I sat by the bedside, scrolling through my phone, keeping him company during his fast. He couldn't eat or drink for 24 hours. Tomorrow, he would undergo tests and a biopsy. I had to wait for his results. I could leave only after that. Rocky opened his eyes and, upon seeing me, his hands trembled uncontrollably. He asked, "Why are you here?" I looked up from my phone screen at him, saying, "Your mom contacted me, asking me to come see you." Then, silence fell again. He didn't want to talk to me, and I had nothing to say to him. We sat there in silence. I felt a bit tired and curled up on the sofa to rest for a while. In my dream, I suddenly thought of what he said about my expression. But I had been dutiful in our marriage for all these years. When I was 29, I fell ill. After the illness, my body was always in a sub-healthy state. Once I got better, I started preparing for pregnancy. That's why I never returned to the workforce. I returned to the family, taking care of everything at home, and helping maintain our relationship. Throughout it all, I owed him nothing. Everything in the dream dragged me, pulling me back. I quickly woke up. He was in severe pain, unable to move. I went outside to borrow a wheelchair, pushing him to the examination room. Before entering the exam room, he fearfully reached for my hand. I subtly moved away and handed him over to the nurse, saying, "Rocky, I'll wait for you outside." He looked back at me and replied with a soft "okay." The examination room door closed, and I was separated from him as if we had entered two worlds. It was all nearing an end, including his life. The pathology results would take a week to come out. I might as well go home and wait, finding a caregiver to take care of his meals and daily needs. He turned and tossed in pain, unable to sleep, muttering my name and my daughter's name. Hearing the caregiver's words, I found it amusing. When the child was born, he complained about having a daughter. Now, facing death, he kept calling her name. A week later, the pathology results came out, and I went to the hospital to collect them. As I expected, it was already advanced stage. He had at most 3 months left to live. Rocky often had stomach pains after social gatherings, regularly taking painkillers. I didn't know when it started. He would get stomach pains from eating cold or spicy food, and then take painkillers. I always thought it was due to his drinking at social events. I kept urging him to get a checkup, but he never took it seriously. This year, I had someone force him to go for an examination, and when the results came out, they sent them to me, which is when he finally went. There were too many chaotic matters. He had long forgotten about the checkup. The doctor said, "Let the patient do what he wants, eat what he wants. Who cares what he wants to do or eat?" I just wanted to send him back to his hometown, hand him over to his parents. I didn't even want to accompany him for the last journey. Holding the results, I walked slowly to the door. Looking at the person inside, I suppressed the smile on my lips. I walked in, handed the results to Rocky, and softly said, "Colon cancer. You probably have a few months left." He read the words one by one, suddenly gripping my clothes, saying, "Impossible, Haley, it can't be. It must be a misdiagnosis. How could I possibly have cancer? There's no misdiagnosis, this is the diagnosis result." I pushed his hand away and took 2 steps back, saying, "You should know the saying, those who do evil will bring about their own demise." He leaned against the head of the bed, his eyes dull and lifeless. I turned and walked away. If he wanted to stay in the hospital, he could stay. If he wanted to see his parents and accompany them on their last journey, I would find someone to take him. In any case, I wouldn't accompany him. When I returned home, the child's cries woke the last bit of softness in my heart. I stepped forward, taking her from the aunt's arms, talking to her in a whisper. "From now on, in this world, only my daughter and I are family. Everything I own is hers. I will never help anyone again." Rocky didn't return to his hometown. He waits downstairs at my building every day, not knowing what for. In the past half-month, Rocky has lost a lot of weight, and there are layers of dark circles under his eyes. Perhaps his stomach hurts, as he often holds his belly. I went downstairs to buy groceries, and he suddenly stopped me. "Haley, can I see the child? Alice is my daughter. I beg you, let me see her." I looked at him, pushed his hand away, and smiled abruptly. "Didn't you think of me being pregnant with your child when you were sleeping with other women? Didn't you think of your child just born when you were on the phone in the bathroom? Now that you're dying, you remember you have a child? Where were you all this time?" I saw him kneel down before me, saying, "I was wrong. I really was wrong. I know I was wrong. Can you let me see her one last time?" Tears streamed down his face, filled with regret. But would he regret it if he hadn't fallen ill? The answer is clear. No, he wouldn't. If Serena had given him a pair of twins, would he regret it? Of course not. He might even be glad that abandoning us was the right decision. Seeing him like this, I frowned slightly. smiling at him. When you die, I'll take Alice to your funeral. But as long as you're alive, I won't let her see you. I'm afraid your dirty eyes will taint my daughter. I turned and walked away, leaving him behind. He followed closely behind me, and after a moment, I heard someone in the crowd say, "Who is this? How did he faint?" I stopped in my tracks and looked back. It was Rockey, standing there. I called 911. Soon, an ambulance took Rockey and me to the hospital. After resuscitation, he still couldn't be saved. His face was covered with a white cloth, and he no longer breathed. I stood there quietly, watching him being taken to the morgue. After a long time, I snapped back to reality, tears overflowing from my eyes. I felt a bit complicated inside. I didn't feel any sense of relief, nor did I feel sad. My heart was almost calm. I called Rockey's parents to let them see him one last time. His mother collapsed onto him, crying non-stop. He was called Rockey, and their expectations of him were evident just from his name. I stepped forward to help his mother up and gently said, "Mom, the dead are dead, but the living must continue living. Rockey wouldn't want to see you like this." She cried and asked me, "How could this happen?" Repeating that question over and over. It's true that Rockey betrayed me, but it's also true that his mother treated me well. Every year when I returned to my hometown, she always made me new cotton clothes and quilts, even though I only stayed for 2 days each time. I owe no one in my life, except her. She cried so hard she fainted and had to be sent to the emergency room. Rockey's father lowered his head and said to me, "Haley, we don't understand anything here. You can take care of the funeral arrangements." "Okay," I replied softly. I arranged for a funeral vehicle to take him for cremation, and I bought him a burial plot. On the day of the memorial service, many people came. An aunt stood aside holding the baby while I bowed at the door. I kept my promise to bring the child to see him after his death. From now on, I won't mention him to the child. I'll just say, "Your father passed away early." Those who came also offered flowers for Rockey. The ashes were buried, and everything returned to tranquility. I sent Rockey's parents back to their hometown, and I gave them a large sum of money so they could live their later years comfortably. As we were leaving, Rockey's mother held my hand and said, "Haley, from now on, this is your home. You should come back often." "I will," I replied. But what I really thought was, unless they fell seriously ill and needed to be brought to the city for treatment, I probably wouldn't come back again. I drove back slowly, memories of my youth flashing before my eyes. In our youth, we truly loved each other. Given the way things ended up, I felt a bit regretful. If Rockey hadn't cheated on me while married, we would have been a happy family of 3. The child would have a gentle father and a loving mother. It's a pity that the past cannot be relived. Everything is settled now. Epilogue: Rockey's perspective. At a business dinner, I fainted. After going to the hospital for an examination, I learned it was cancer. The first thing I saw when I woke up was Haley. Her expression was calm and unperturbed, and there was no trace of sympathy in her eyes. In that moment, I suddenly remembered that after my business dinners, she would always pour me a glass of warm water and softly remind me, "Don't drink so much alcohol. It's bad for your health." At that time, I would just dismiss her. On that peaceful afternoon, everything from the past unfolded before me. It was the moment Haley and I first met, our wedding, and her giving birth. I had forgotten when I became tired of Haley. Perhaps it was every time I worked overtime and returned home. She would always nag at me. I didn't like the mundane details, yet I still had to deal with her. If I ignored her, she would give me the silent treatment. Sometimes it lasted a day, other times a week. Year after year, I grew weary. I found a new girl outside, someone who resembled the young Haley, pretty, gentle, and bright. In short, she was wonderful in every way. I started taking more business trips, finding various excuses to avoid going home. I didn't know if Haley noticed, but I still treated her as I always had. This went on for year after year, until the night before she gave birth. Someone told me that she was also pregnant. They pressured me to marry her. I contemplated this and pulled out the divorce agreement I had prepared, reading it over and over. I thought that once the child turned 1, I would bring up the divorce with Haley, but my sordid affair was caught by her. She went crazy. Meanwhile, the woman behind me, even when crying, was so gentle that it instinctively triggered my protective instinct. That day, I proposed a divorce to Haley, and she signed the agreement. After some time, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau to process the divorce. As the cooling-off period was about to end, she suddenly changed her mind. I didn't know why. Looking back now, there must have been a reason. These memories invade my dreams every night, keeping me awake. I want to see my daughter, even if just for the last time. But I waited downstairs day after day until Haley came down. I stopped her and expressed my request. She wouldn't let me see her. She said she would take the child to my funeral when I died. I followed her closely, my body uncontrollably leaning back. It seemed I was about to die. In fact, Haley was right. If I weren't ill, I wouldn't regret anything, because I would have a better life. The company may not be big, but it was comfortable enough. Someone would certainly be with me again, and I would have another family. But now, I'm dying. Everything comes to an end, and the past has all become past. So be it. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.